Welcome to Volume 3 of Chad Talks. In this version, we're going to learn how to change a wall. So as we look at our wall, the little green pencil, as I mentioned before, is how we can edit the wall. So if we click on the green pencil, there are three basic panes within the Editing the Wall feature. In the first column on the left side, you can add additional filters in. So if we look at some of our filter choices, right now the default is filtering a grade level. We already have one grade level filtered in this wall, but if we wanted to limit this wall a little bit differently with grade levels, we could either get rid of this filter, or we could add some other filters on, depending on what this first one talked about. We already have a specific grade filter, so we wouldn't want to add another grade level because there would be no students in both grades. The other things that you could do are things like gender, special ed status. You can see the list here. And as you pick something in the top row, then these columns and values start to change based on what you chose in the first row. At this point, we're not going to add any more filters, so we're going to just cancel that out. In the middle column is all of the data that you could put on the wall. So these are the available columns, and we'll go into that a little bit more deeply soon. And the final column over here on the right are everything that is already on the wall. You can see how it has some color coding. If you remember from the wall, there were some things that were grouped together. So for example, maze is grouped together, and you can see that because these are grouped underneath the heading of maze. Then there's some color coding that allows us to do that as well. Each of these things, if you decide you wanted them in a different place on the wall, you can actually just drop and drag. So you could click and drag these pieces around. The grouping feature works once you create a group name. If you just slide things over from left to right, or that would now be ungrouped. So if I wanted it to go back inside of that group, I would just drag it back over and click and hold and move it over to the right, and then that'll put a group there. We'll learn how to put those groups in a little while. So if I wanted to take pieces of the wall, if I look under the copy button, there's an edit for each category. There's a copy, and then there's a delete. If I wanted, for example, something on there twice, so here I've got two RCBMs, and then I changed one so that it specifically talked about winter, and I changed the other so that it specifically talked about fall. We could make copies of the walls of each column, and then just manipulate it a little bit from there, rather than starting from scratch for each of the columns. So if I wanted to do that, let's just pretend I wanted to put a second school name on there. I'm going to change the name slightly just so that we can see how it is, and you'll see that down here at the bottom, school number 2 was added. In this case, the school would be exactly the same. There's no other filtering or manipulation you can make, so there's not much point in having that on there. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete it off again, just to show you that it's that easy to copy a column, and then it's just as simple to delete that column away. So if I wanted to take another piece off of this column, for example, let's say I no longer wanted to consider my ELL status here, I'm just going to delete ELL status. If I go back and view the wall now, I can see that my ELL status has gone away. When I'm on this wall, you might have noticed that it just bumped down a little bit. Everything in this wall is sortable and can put a filter on it. If I click on the word of the header, so for example points, I could see from low to high who has the least number of points and who has the most number of points just by clicking on the word points. We'll talk a little bit about how you accrue points or don't accrue points in a moment. You can also see that reading level. So these are the fourth graders. So let's say that we wanted to find everybody who was a K. If I just type the letter K in, it'll filter down to just those students who are a K. You can get a little bit fancier and you can go with something like greater than K, and it should filter everybody who is greater than K right down all at the same time. And so you could get a little bit creative there. Some of the filters would be difficult, I think, to make right on this wall. So you may have to go in and edit the wall and put some hard, fast filters in based on this left-hand column over here. At this point, we could decide that we wanted to add something else on this wall. So this is a reading wall for fourth grade at Meadowview. So let's say that we wanted to put other information on the wall. We could see, well, what kind of information do we have here? There is some math information on here as well. So maybe we would want to add another piece to this wall here. We could think about, well, what are some of our options? Well, these students being in fourth grade this year, they've never taken WKCE, so that would only really work for some historical information. Meadowview doesn't have the SRI, so that isn't going to produce much information. We could start to put some units of study writing on there. So maybe we'll just take one of those features and go ahead and do that. So we've got a units of study, we've got a writing, and then each of the features that were on the rubric exist as an additional field here. So if I double click on craft, for example, you'll notice that craft comes down to the bottom of the wall, and it opens up a field for us to determine what exactly out of craft do we want to put on the wall. So in this case, there is no display field category, so we don't have to worry about that. Depending on the feature that you're putting on, there might be a difference in display field options. We're going to just leave it as the most recent. Otherwise, we could go back and say, if I want a time period, I want a grade level, so I want a fourth grade craft feature. We could actually check this from fourth grade or from third grade and say, I want the third grade spring, winter, and fall, and then I also want the second grade spring, winter, and fall, all of craft. If we had that many pieces of data loaded in, you could then see historically kind of what the trend is of that student for craft. So I'm just going to leave it as most recent, keep it very simple, and click OK. And if all of our students have craft loaded in, we will see them all appear on the wall. So we're going to try. I don't recall if craft is loaded in for Meadowview. So, and so if you get an error like this, it means that the data isn't loaded in for that particular piece. And we're continuing to work on loading all of the data correctly. But in this case, writing is one of the last things that we were working with. So we're going to go back and edit the wall. We didn't like that put on. This is one reason that I recommend you only put one thing on the wall at a time, because if you get an error on the wall, it's kind of difficult to say, well, which column caused the error for me? Well, in this case, it was craft. And we could tell because it was the last thing we put on the wall, and we only added one thing to the wall, and it was working before then. So if we go through and wanted to identify a different piece of information to put on the wall, maybe we could put the benchmark reading comprehension test and see if that is going to work. I don't see a display field, which might be a hint that it's not going to work, but we'll try it anyways. And I'm going to go back and view my wall. Like I suspected, if you don't see something in that drop-down menu, it probably means that no students in this building have that piece of information, which is what's causing the error. So if we go back to something like Ames Web, and we can do a CBM, if we wanted to add another piece of information on the wall, so for example, we have our CBM and maze already. Let's go ahead and put another RCBM on here. And we're going to keep it as a score instead of a percentile. We want the most recent scores again. Actually, in this case, we're 4th graders. We want 3rd grade. So we're going to put 3rd grade of spring in here. And I already know that 3rd grade of spring is coming in the next couple of days, so it might not appear there, but it's all set up correctly because of the fact that the display field is working correctly. And so we can go through and add that piece on here. Now it's RCBM. Now I really want this RCBM to show up here. Let's just take a look at the wall and see what it does look like. So this final RCBM category does not have any data, as I mentioned it wouldn't. And it showed up way over here, and the rest of the RCBMs are over here. So if I go back to editing my wall, I can drag that up to the rest of the RCBMs. I know that it's going to be spring, so I'm going to put it underneath that part there, and I'm just going to retitle this as spring. And click OK. And you can see that when everything is saved correctly, these dots for these test versions change to a vertical alignment. As long as there's no little disk up here for a save button, that means it's already been saved. Otherwise, if you move things around, it's going to ask you to save it. If you don't hit save, it's just going to revert back to what it was before. So I'm going to go back and view the wall. I'm not going to save that part because I don't really care if these get switched around or not. And now we can see that this got grouped and it turned purple. So the spring scores are now grouped along with the other RCBM scores. So at this point, we've figured out how we can add and subtract things from the walls and can start to group some pieces together. If you wanted to create a new group, we could go back and edit the wall. Once you have something for grouping, under functions, this is a group down here, and we're going to call this group demographics. And the default color is this orange color. I think it's kind of ugly, but I've used a bunch of other nice looking colors, so I'll put the orange color on there for this time. And so now that group demographics ended up way down at the bottom, but my demographics are really kind of up here. We'll call a student number a demographic and a special ed status a demographic. So I'm going to redrag this all the way up here. I'm going to have to scroll up a little bit. So I'm going to put it right here. And I want these two categories grouped underneath demographics. So if I drag this to the right a little bit, oh, there we go. And then we drag this one to the right a little bit. These are now grouped together. And if we go back, oh, we better hit save on this one. If there's a save button, you need to hit the save button. And then the little dots went vertical again.